and welcome back to Weekly Buying Tips. I'm Dean Berman from Berman Buys. Today we're going to talk about waterfront suburbs. With the virus easing restrictions and holiday destinations opening up, it seems like a good time to talk about how many of these areas have performed. We will look at 10-year growth rates, with a focus on houses purely for ease of comparison. We will also focus on the Eastern Seaboard of Australia, starting at the top in Port Douglas, Northern Queensland, going through New South Wales and landing up in west of Victoria in an area called Wanamble. In general, there seems to be some pretty mixed results in North Queensland. Port Douglas and Cairns had average growth, around 30%-ish over the last 10 years. But really poor performance in Townsville, Mackay and Gladstone. Negative growth, generally speaking, over the last 10 years. Some highlights in the Sunshine Coast were definitely Noosa Heads, with growth upwards of 70% over the last 10 years. And also alright growth in Mooloolaba and Shelly Beach, with growth upwards of 40%. Growth was also very low in areas north and south of Brisbane. Areas like Moreton Bay, so regions Moreton Bay and Redland Bay, coastal regions. Areas like Deception Bay, Victoria Point, Redland Bay, all growth hovering give or take around 10%, which isn't that fantastic over the last 10 years. In Brisbane, however, results were far improved in suburbs going along the Brisbane River. Areas like New Farm, Bulimba, St. Lucia, Indooroopilly, Yeronga, to name a few. Majority of these had growth upwards of 20 or 30%, and some even had upwards around the 50% mark, such as Bulimba. Results on the Gold Coast were fairly average, with areas like Mermaid Beach and Southport with growth around 30%. However, as we enter New South Wales, results start to pick up. Pretty strong results in northern New South Wales in areas like Byron Bay and Lennox Heads. Byron Bay achieving upwards of 90% growth and Lennox Heads around 48%. Also really strong growth around Forster, around 48%, and Blueys Beach, 153%. However, it is a smaller population there, so it can be heavily affected by small changes in prices. In general, the Sydney region and the surrounding regions experienced very strong growth over the last 10 years. Some areas include Nelson Bay, Bar Beach, Terrigal, Umina Beach, Manly, Mosman, Bondi, Kurnell and Austinmere, Shell Harbour, Kiama and Huskisson. All these suburbs had growth above 50%, with some key standouts in areas like Manly, Bondi, Kurnell and Huskisson. Batemans Bay and Noosa Beach performed averagely, with growth around 35%. As we enter Victoria, we now see that most suburbs in Victoria experienced growth above 50% over the last 10 years, similar to Sydney. Areas like Inverloch, 49%, Mornington, 67%, Frankston, 64%, St Kilda, 106%, Point Cook, 47%, Geelong, 67%, and Torquay, 57%. Many of these suburbs are in line with the results that Sydney experienced along the same period of time. And we finish in Wanamble with average growth around 20%. So the key question is, what can we learn from all these figures? Generally speaking, New South Wales and Victoria have largely outperformed Queensland in the last 10 years, particularly all these waterfront or riverfront suburbs. Each suburb and even region will have differing factors affecting the performance of the area, and these are generally down to supply and demand. We can also assume that the poor performance experienced in parts of northern Queensland and areas like Townsville, Mackay and Gladstone are probably largely down to economic and demographic factors which affected those markets. I would assume that industries such as mining, agriculture and tourism were some of the key factors that affected these markets, and that obviously created an imbalance between supply and demand. It's interesting to note that many of these really strong performing suburbs have a really strong reputation and desirability factor about them. Areas like Noosa Heads, Byron Bay, Bar Beach, which is by Newcastle, Manly, Bondi, St Kilda, Torquay,